Just how doomed is the United States? Hello, welcome to Dangerous Policy, a channel aimed at intelligent people wanting to discuss important issues facing life and society. My name is Crispin, and today I want to talk about the civil unrest that is happening right across the United States and where this could potentially lead. A lot of people are now speculating about the total unthinkable, that there could be a new civil conflict in America. How likely is that? What are the different pathways to that eventuality? What would it look like? And how could it be avoided? Well, when speculating on something so dire as the civil collapse of American social contract, it's worth thinking the last time this happened. The Americans have been through something like this before in the American Civil War, of course, 1861 to 1865. Now, if you're in the United States, there's only one narrative that is socially acceptable in polite societies, and that is that the American Civil War was about to end slavery. It was all about slavery. Everything about it was slavery, and the good guys beat the bad guys because slavery subsequently ended. Well, there is something to that narrative. Of course, the war did end slavery, and it certainly was the case that the southern states, the southern slave-owning states, were highly motivated by the issue of slavery to cede from the Union. So the creation of the Confederacy was born out of fear that the new states that were being incorporated into the Union were going to be free states, and that the senators and things that would be added to Congress and the electoral colleges would make it completely lopsided in favor of the abolitionists, threatening what the Southerners saw as their traditional way of life. Now, this all came to a head when Abraham Lincoln was elected president of the United States with less than 40% of the popular vote. His name didn't even appear on the ballot in 10 states. And so that was at that point that the southern states got together and declared that they were ceding from the Union. So the American Civil War wasn't about ending slavery, certainly not initially. It was about preserving the Union. That the northern states got together and said, no, we're not going to allow the United States to break up. It was about 70 years old at this point. We're going to force the southern states to remain part of our federal structure, and therefore we will declare war on the Confederacy in order to bring them to heel. Now, what that means is if the southern states threw down their arms, any time in the first sort of year and a half of the war and said, look, no, we don't want to have a conflict anymore, we will rejoin the Union, then that would have happened with no change whatever to the laws surrounding slavery. And slavery would have persisted as an institution in the United States for decades to come. As it happened, slaves were considered sort of contraband. They were captured by the unions and sort of set free and set to work in the northern states. There was, of course, many slaves escaping from the southern states to the northern states during the Civil War. It was seen as sort of grinding down the Confederacy sort of labor force, and so it was considered a legitimate war aim, but it wasn't for the purposes of freeing these people or for the pure humanitarian reasons. It was more about forcing the South to capitulate. It wasn't until 1863 that we had the famous Emancipation Proclamation. And by that stage, it was almost an act of desperation. The Fredericksburg was a huge battle that the Union was utterly crushed in, and therefore this was an expression of total war, that you were going to have anyone who was found to be in bondage in the southern states, they would be made free. And then, of course, you had the famous 13th Amendment after the war that ensured the rights and freedoms of all people in the United States. So that's how it all kind of happened. But initially, it was the fear of the expansion of the Union into other new states that were going to be freehold states and what it would mean for slavery in the southern states that caused the Confederacy. How does this all relate to the present day? Well, we can start to see how a lot of people, for whatever worldview, if we take the horrible moral issues of slavery out of the picture and just talk about you had one group of people that had one vision of America and another group of people who had an incompatible vision of America, and the constitutional challenges that one side feared, right, which spurred them to action. Well, right now we have Democrats threatening to so-called stack the Supreme Court of the United States. That is, if Ruth Bader Ginsburg is replaced with Amy Coney Barrett, that when the Democrats come into office, they will expand the number of justices on the Supreme Court beyond the current 9, putting additional pro-democratic justices on there in order to swing the balance of the court away from the originalists towards the progressives. Now, the consequence of that is to bring the entire institution of the US Supreme Court down to a farce, right? If you continue to add new justices to it, then of course when the Republicans come to power, they would do exactly the same. And so what you do is you undermine the very foundation of that key element of American governance, that third pillar of the judiciary. You also have strongly on the Democratic agenda to introduce Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. as new states in America. This is sort of sounding familiar. So as that they can have additional senators and additional electoral college votes that will always vote progressive. So these are on the agenda to try and swing the balance away from the current 50-state structure, swing the balance away from the current US Supreme Court structure, and that is an objective rather than trying to solve the problems that exist within the current system, is to change the system on a partisan basis. And that is a way to undermine the integrity of the institutions that everybody needs to unify around. So that's a real grave danger. Another issue, of course, is in the internet age and in the instant global communication age, much easier for people to organize, much easier to have insurgent ideologies and also counter ideologies. And the groups form very, very quickly. They can identify each other across state lines, and they can create, communities that are quite fractious. And what we're finding in the social media age, far from bringing everyone together, it has isolated people into various tribes that, people are locked in their Facebook echo chambers, people in the sort of Twitter hate wars. You have the kind of the sort of intersectional types on the coast, and then you have the conservative types in the middle. And that's, creating people to self-select. You find people like Ben Shapiro and Joe Rogan, they've moved away from California to Tennessee and Texas respectively. So people who do not go along with that single party mindset are self-selecting to relocate to places where they're in people that they would consider more aligned with their ideology. Now, that might be fine on one level, but on another, it creates a monolithic culture from where they go. Because if you take all the conservatives out of the progressive areas, and you just have progressives, and if you take all of the progressives out of the conservative areas, you just have conservatives, and therefore you have this increasingly accelerated fragmentation of American civil life. It's that you don't have interactions with people who don't have the same ideology and same views as you, which means that it's harder for you to humanize those people. You also see a massive decline in opinion of the other party. So as I mentioned in one of the previous videos, there was a study done in the 1960s that asked, look, how would you feel if your son or daughter married a member of the opposite political party? Almost nobody had thought of it before. They were like, in the 1960s, they're like, yeah, sure, that seems great, And that's because everyone had a shared bonding experience of World War II. Everyone in Congress was a veteran of that war. So the divide of Democrat to Republican seemed trivial at best. Everyone thought that they were working towards the best things for America across party lines, and it was just that they had different ideas of how to achieve it. So it wasn't considered a divide. Whereas fast forward to a couple of years ago, same question is asked, over 40% of respondees said that they would have serious problems if their son or daughter married a member of the opposite political party. What that means is that their party affiliation has remained constant, but their opinion of the opposing party has degenerated down to something that is, demonic. And we're seeing this tragically with the illness of the President of the United States, where horrible things are being said on Twitter from those of the other side. That we're irrespective of your views on the president, the way he's handled the disease or his policies, he's the American head of state. And if you're openly wishing harm, then that tells you that people are highly ideologically possessed. That they have suppressed their understanding of one's common humanity and subordinated that to an ideology that they think is overriding. And what that means is it allows people to do things that are in fact terrible, such as wishing harm, with a higher level justification. And that's a product of a tinderbox of civil strife. And then there is the lack of external threats. So in the case of the United States, when they've all come together as a nation, what brought them out of the Great Depression and the fragmentation that was happening in American life at that time was, of course, World War II. You have these sort of unifying nationhood building events. Similarly, in 2001, where you had the Twin Towers, America was already doing pretty well at that stage, but when New York was hit with the Saudi suicide attackers, you had the entire United States backing the New Yorkers, and it was a huge bonding experience for all of America. It created serious problems in other ways, wars overseas and so on. But nevertheless, in terms of American communal life, everyone felt like an American because everyone felt like a New Yorker. So that is absent at the moment. We don't have those unifying external events. And unless China does something really stupid, they'll just hang back and let this civil struggle to continue to play out in American life. So there isn't a direct external challenge to the United States that is unifying. Even the whole kind of Russiagate threat has been turned into a partisan football. People don't and probably shouldn't take the Russia conspiracy at all seriously, but it has been used as a weapon that Democrats have used to try and delegitimize the president, and of course it has fallen flat for many years. So what will such a conflict look like? Well, it's not clear. There are differences with the American Civil War, so we don't have a bunch of geographically homogenous people all agreeing that they no longer can withstand being part of the American social contract. In fact, those that are usually the most disaffected are the ones that are currently the beneficiaries of the process. So the people that believe in maintaining the originalist interpretation of the Constitution, well, they're currently benefiting from electoral vote system. So if there was a breakdown, it would likely be from the Democrat side and probably be as a consequence of Donald Trump being re-elected president of the United States, but with only an electoral college victory and not winning the popular vote. Because those people that would be looking at it and say, oh, it's an outrage that a president can win with a minority of the vote, will continue with their civil unrest and see this as an illegitimate government, illegitimate president, and seek to continue with their radical ideologies. And as a consequence, we also have the major social discords that are legitimate inequities. So during the COVID era, American billionaires have made between 400 to 600 billion US dollars. They are richer than they've ever been before. Even coming into the crisis, 1% of the United States controlled 40% of the national wealth, while 80% of the population, 250 million Americans, controlled just 7% between them. So we're going to have this disparity increasing exponentially as a consequence of this disaster, where 50% of Americans are worried about losing their homes, while a very tiny, minute number of people are experiencing an extraordinary increase in their wealth as a result of controlling scalable industry. So that there's no way for that to be sustainable. And one thing you can say about that kind of science is that things that are unsustainable won't be sustained, and that means that there will be a massive correction, in this case probably in the form of major civil backlash. So I am deeply concerned about the United States. I think that we are, it is not inconceivable that America could collapse into a general civil struggle, but it's less likely to be, the state of California versus the state of Texas, as it was sort of in the Civil War, where you had the Confederate States and the Union States. It's much more likely to be movements of extreme positions of one side and then the counter position. We saw in the first debate, and neither side seems willing to denounce their own radicals. Joe Biden did not denounce Antifa, and President Trump did not denounce the Proud Boys. So there isn't really strong unifying voices. Even if Joe Biden imagined himself to be a unifier, he proved against that in the first debate, where he was unable to live up to the kind of harmonious language that people who remembered the Obama years were very fond of. He went straight into the gutter with Trump. So I don't see any major unifying political forces leading at the top end. I do just see an increasing fragmentation, and essentially, if you bend that bone enough, eventually it'll snap. So I don't know how to come out of this. The only way that I see the United States unifying is a new generation of leaders, the Tulsi Gabbards of the world, who do speak across party lines, and also a unifying external event that brings everyone together. So if there was a conflict over Taiwan or something like that, then the Americans will suddenly remember they're Americans and be on the same side. That's just how Americans are. But until then, I think we are seeing a unraveling of American social life and potentially civil war, potentially a revolution, and I can't put it any more starkly than that. If you found value in this conversation, please do like and subscribe. It's not a happy topic, but I definitely think it's an important one, and something that, there are Nobel laureates who have been talking about this. It's not just me. Very important issue, and do leave your views down below. Happy to engage with them, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you.